our brain is naturally resistant to change, there is a wall of protection around that sense of self feeling storage bank because it's protecting our survival mechanism that was
Mm-hmm.
developed very early in life, before we had a choice, before it was a conscious decision. And that survival mechanism got us through childhood. As bad as it might have been, was for me, I know it was for you and lots of people,
Mm-hmm.
um, it got us through. And so
Yeah.
the brain says, you're not touching this because
Mm-hmm.
this is how I've survived, and don't you dare think you are going to mess with this.
Imagine being in agonizing pain and desperately trying to make it go away. You read the books, go to the workshops, support groups, and spend hours trying to figure out what works. Yet every day feels like Groundhog Day. When you wake up, it's like you're starting from zero. Maybe you notice some improvement in your symptoms, but that underlying feeling that something is wrong with you and that you don't deserve any better won't go away. There are many possible explanations, and they can vary from person to person. But if you ask this episode's guest, she might invite you to explore whether what you're experiencing is coming from something called learned distress. In this episode, I am delighted to share my conversation with Sara Avery, Executive Director of the Learned Stress Removal Process. We talked about the connection between emotional and physical health, the role of sleeping in healing, understanding learned distress, how to begin accessing your core well being, and so much more. Hello, trauma brains! For those that are new, hi, I'm Raisa. I'm a trauma survivor who lives with complex PTSD, and I created this podcast because I know how confusing and isolating healing can feel. Welcome to Hello Trauma Brain. Here we talk about the ups and downs of healing complex trauma, boundaries, coming to terms with the fact that people I love were abusing me, and what it looks like to heal one slow and tiny step at a time. If you're living with C-PTSD or supporting someone who is, this podcast is for you. New episodes are released every other Thursdays or as my trauma brain allows. Before we get into the episode, a quick reminder, I am not a therapist or mental health professional. Everything shared here is based on my own experience, and this podcast is not meant to replace or substitute therapy or medical support. If you think you might be living with complex PTSD or any other mental health condition mentioned in this podcast, please reach out to a licensed professional who can support you. Any people, services, or resources mentioned in this episode are not sponsors of Hello Trauma Brain, and the views shared by today's guests are their own. Also, this episode may mention trauma or topics that might feel activating. If at any point you need to pause, take a break, or skip the episode completely, please do what is best for you. All right, let's get into the show. Quick check in, and I'm just going to be super brief. I want to start off by thanking you so much for your patience. I did not intend to take this big break in between the last episode and this one. I am going to be honest, I've been burnt out. I've been feeling like I'm running on fumes and I needed some extra space. And there was a point between like the Sunday, Monday mark every week for the past few weeks where I was trying to force this production, and I would get to that realization of, oh, wait, I'm doing it. I'm doing the pushing and forcing and neglecting everything else to make this one thing happen. And that's just not good for me. And I'm practicing allowing myself to have some extra space. So that's what I did. And even as I am talking to you right now, I'm realizing that usually I make some sort of announcement on Instagram or I put something on the bio site. I didn't even do that. And at this point, I think I'm going to let it go and I'm going to give myself some compassion, some space, and just accept the fact that it's okay. I do say, as my trauma brain allows, and that is what it looks like. It looks like me taking a 3 to 4 week break. So I'm back. Still a little bit overwhelmed, but feeling a little bit more rested after this past holiday long weekend. And here we are. I'm also in the process of trying to reclaim spring. I feel excited about it. I also feel nervous about it because I know that spring tends to bring some triggers for me, but I'm trying to keep calm and we'll see how it goes. Now, today's guest is someone whose story really resonated with me. Sara Avery is the executive director of the Learn the Stress Removal Process, and she has spent the last 25 years helping people heal from complex trauma. What drew me to Sarah's work is that her journey started with her own healing. Sarah's father was very ill when she was born, and he passed away when she was just 3.5 years old. That early loss left a deep imprint, and one that eventually showed up as severe adrenal fatigue and endocrine suppression. Sarah is the author of the book Feel Good Being You. Now, Sarah also happens to be a listener of the podcast, and it was extra special for me to have this lovely conversation with a member of the Hello Trauma Brain community. I do want to acknowledge before we even get started that Sarah's process might sound a bit unconventional. I think that something that enriches this podcast is learning about new approaches to healing complex trauma. And if you are a regular listener of the podcast, you probably know by now that there's no one size fits all when it comes to C-PTSD. And finding something that can help alleviate or manage symptoms can vary, as we all have our own personal journey when it comes to living with C-PTSD. So that being said, I invite you to keep an open mind and see what resonates with you. I am really excited for you to hear what Sarah has to offer. And without any further delay, here is my conversation with Sara Avery. All right, trauma brains. I can finally introduce you to Sara Avery. I am so thrilled to talk to you, Sarah. And thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. How are you feeling today?
I am feeling so good and just really excited about our conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for reaching out to me. I know you've been a follower of the podcast before we got to connect for this, so it's really exciting to get to talk to a guest who's also part of the community. So, thank you so much again, Sarah. I wanted to start off with something that you emphasize a lot in your content, and is how long you've spent helping people heal from complex trauma. And I wanted to ask you, how did you feel drawn to that type of work, and what called you to dedicate yourself to helping others?
Well, it was really my own experience with this work that I do because I needed it so much. So I was in my late 20s and I was burning out on my first career as a professional symphony orchestra violinist. And I'd also been dealing with endocrine dysfunction for a number of years, sort of overall endocrine suppression that neither alternative nor traditional medicine was really helping me heal from. And so that's when I came to this work that I do now. And I initially thought it would help with emotional stuff, fear of abandonment, need for people's approval, perfectionism, that kind of stuff. And it certainly did. But what was interesting was I heard the founder of the work, who was my guide, tell me that her initial research question was, why do people get sick? And I realized she was connecting how we feel emotionally as humans to our physical health. And that's when I started to think, well, wait a second, could this help with my endocrine situation? I
Mhm.
started making connections between what I didn't yet call trauma, but between what had happened to me as a child and how that brought about my endocrine dysfunction. And actually, my first major change with this process was the disappearance of all of those endocrine and adrenal fatigue symptoms that I had going back into elementary school, 20 plus years. And that happened
Wow.
fairly quickly within a few months for me. So that was amazing. And then I was also at the same time experiencing this real shift in how I felt about being myself, because I had really felt very overly dependent on other people, on what they thought of me, on their support, on everything from other people. And I started to feel a shift to this more inner foundation of being myself, of knowing who I was, of taking my own opinion first instead of everyone else's. And I remember this amazing moment where I was standing on my front porch and realized, I don't care what that guy thinks of me. And that was so life changing because I had never not cared about what everyone thought of me.
Mhm.
And so it was an amazing moment, and I started to realize, wait a second, I have this stronger inner foundation now. And so that was a point where I had been thinking about changing from my violin career, but that's all I'd ever done. I didn't know what to do. Some friends were saying, you're a great listener, you should be a therapist. Other friends were saying, you are a quick study on the endocrine system, you should go to medical school. And neither of those felt really right to me. But here was this work that was bringing all of that together for me. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I kind of reached out to the founder who was my guide and said, I want to do what you do. And she said, okay, great. And so I moved to Kentucky where she had done all of her research and where she was living, and studied with her and sat by her side and collaborated with her to help her refine the process further. That was after her formal research had ended, and that was how this started. And I've been guiding people through this process ever since for the past 25 years.
Wow. Okay, Sarah, just like there's so many good things in here. And I want to circle back to something that I feel like I have experienced myself, and every trauma survivor I've met has a manifestation of this in one way or another. And it's the physical manifestation of the trauma, how it impacts our health, our physical health specifically, and how it's all connected. And I have to say, I'm so proud of you. I'm so glad that you were able to find this framework, but still up to your late 20s, living the way that you used to live with all that pain and all those chronic symptoms. I cannot even imagine what it was like, and how transformational it is to hear you talk about how not only those symptoms have resolved, but even how that dependence on other people's opinions and their view of you has also softened. And it kind of sounds like it's irrelevant at this point. Like how are you feeling with that now? Does it still creep up here and there?
The worry about other people's
Yeah.
thoughts. So I can say that if at that time it was 14 on a scale of 1 to 10,
Hmm.
every day, every second of every day, that's
Yeah.
how it felt to me.
Yeah.
I would say these days, this is 25 years later, on a scale of 1 to 10, occasionally it might feel like a 1 or a 2 for a few minutes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's significant. That's a really big progress. Wow. Okay. I am so curious. So you started this work, and then I just want to throw the name of your mentor and the creator is Mimi Herman, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So how long are you still working with Mimi on Learn the Stress?
So she passed away almost 20 years ago. So since
Okay.
then, this has been my work. But yeah, so since then, I've been basically my own guide, unfortunately, because there's no one else. So people ask me that sometimes, and I'm also always getting feedback from friends and family and everyone around me, and seeing things in clients that resonates for me. So that
Hmm.
helps me keep working forward
Hmm.
for myself in the process as I'm working with clients.
Wow, that's incredible. So it kind of sounded like you got to work with her for a little bit of the beginning of your transition, and then the baton was passed on to you. At this point, like have you brought more people on board that are also doing this work with you, or is it just you right now?
For now, it's just me. That certainly is
Okay.
coming in the future, but
Yeah.
for now, it's just me. Yeah.
That is that's a lot to do, Sarah. Oh my
Yeah.
god. I can only imagine. I am wondering, as you have been going through this process, how has it shaped and helped you understand trauma? So I know 25 years is a long time. Like at one point, would you say that you started to see the shift in your clients as you kept integrating Learn Distress into your practice?
Yeah. Well, I tend to see the shift in my clients within the first few weeks.
Wow.
So, yeah. So I generally start to see in this work, and we'll probably end up touching on it here and there is a repeating cycle of change where people where the brain allows a layer of learned distress to be removed, and that then it fills in behind. What fills in behind is our core well being, which has been with us from the beginning, which is the core essence, the uniqueness of who we are. And as that core well being takes over, they feel different. Things work differently for them in a way they haven't experienced before. And that is something where we start to generally see that within the first few weeks when they start working with the process.
Wow. Just for reference, so like when we're saying a few weeks, like how often are you working with them a week and how long are the sessions?
Yeah, so I generally work with people once every 2 weeks, and that's an hour long session once every 2 weeks.
Okay.
And so that's my work with them. The process is unfolds in three ongoing integral elements. So that work with me is one part of it, but really their brain is engaging in this work in on its own actually during sleep. I know that can sound really strange that wait, we're working with the brain during sleep. But
Mm-hmm.
what the research that Mimi and her team did found is that sleep is the time when our sense of self, which is like a feeling storage bank that stores how we feel about being ourselves, this is when the sense of self is getting recharged during sleep, specifically during REM sleep when we dream.
Okay.
And that they developed this process to actually access our sense of self, that feeling storage bank, and say, I want to recharge with my core well being, with feeling good being myself, instead of recharging with this feeling that there's something wrong with me, which is the term that Mimi used for learned distress. So,
Okay.
learned distress is what we've generally been recharging with every night of our lives because we feel our learned distress intensely during the day, that feeling there's something wrong with me and
Yeah.
I have to be some certain way in order to overcome it. We're feeling that all day long. And then we go to sleep and our brain uses that not just to integrate, but to recharge our sense of self. And so they develop this process to tap into that natural recharging process and say to the brain, I want to recharge with feeling good, with my core well being, instead of recharging with learned distress. And the brain is kind of a machine in that way. It recharges with what you tell it to recharge with. So these three integral elements of the process are working with me to understand the process, to have guidance, to kind of like you would a therapist, where you're sharing what's going on with you, what your struggles are, what your frustrations are, what you
Mm.
want to see happen.
Yeah.
But then I'm helping you tell your brain what you want it to change during sleep. And that's aided so by a recording that you play overnight that while you're sleeping that sounds kind of like a guided meditation, but it really is a specific message to tell your brain in a generic way. Everyone sleeps with the same recording. It's generically saying, I want to recharge with well-being, not with learn to stress. And then you have a specific daytime, simple daytime process that you go through, and you use that to very specifically tell your brain, I want to feel good enough just being myself instead of perfectionist, or I know within myself that I matter instead of needing validation from somebody else. So that daytime process is what really customizes the process towards you and tells your brain specifically what you want to change. And so it's really those three elements that bring about this repeating cycle of change that removes learned distress, allows it to be replaced by core well-being.
Wow. Okay. I want to pull this thread because here's what I'm finding very fascinating. And the timing is a bit uncanny on my end because this week in particular, I mean, I struggle with nightmares all the time, but I'm fully aware. Thank you. I'm fully aware that like that's when like this particular week, like 2 nights ago, it like there's those nightmares that like kind of wake you up and then like it's like 3 in the morning and it takes you like a good hour to like come down. So like even hearing you talk, I could hear like or remember what happened this weekend. It's like that's so it connects in this way because I feel like my brain is constantly, even when I'm sleeping, trying to process the things that happened. So I'm not shocked. And I'm actually kind of intrigued to hear that you are bringing that into the equation because I feel like for us trauma survivors, like the typical model that we picture is you go see the professional, and then the work happens in that room, and then you have to wait till the next session to continue the work. And when I'm hearing you talk about learning distress and how you are helping your clients find their core well-being, is the work is not just with you in that room. The work is continuing every night when they're sleeping. It's continuing every day when they are putting into practice the tools that they're learning with you. And I feel like that starts to put the pieces together in terms of why you're getting the rates of success that you're getting so fast. Because I feel like I feel like psychology, that field, it has a lot of growth needs to happen there. But I feel like bringing for a long time, like taking the clients off of just doing the work in the room is so important, especially for somebody like us who have complex trauma.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I remember something that I hear constantly in your content is like you point out how we're stuck in this feeling of like we just don't get better, and we try all the things, and we try doing, we read all the books and take all the content in, and there's something that's just not clicking. And something that I really am intrigued by is how you're seeing this progress with your clients within weeks when they're only seeing you like every 2 weeks. Like that sounds pretty good to me, honestly, with the research. Now i I'm like thinking here, because complex trauma presents in so many different ways. So I feel like you probably have seen so many things during these last 25 years. Has there been like is the weeks like the average, or like are people like, can they expect like it might take a little bit longer, months? Like does it depend on the type of trauma? Like what are you seeing in your practice so far?
Yeah, so I would say that nearly everyone sees some of this repeating change. They see this repeating change cycle happen. And
Mhm.
most people see the good feeling part of the change cycle within the first few weeks,
Okay.
very often within the first week. Once I talk to them the second time, usually there is what I would say is measurable change. One of the hallmarks of this process is that people don't notice the change when it happens. Here's why. So, what we're used to doing is working really, really, really hard to overcome our learned distress, to squelch it, to leap over it, to slog through it. And then, on top of that energy we've just expended, then we expend more energy to make something good happen, right? This
Mm.
is how we notice good things happening, is by the Herculean effort that we have put into making them happen. What the good outcomes from this process come effortlessly from your core well-being. Now that doesn't mean you're going to sit on the couch eating Ben and Jerry's and having winning lottery tickets delivered, but what it does mean is that things start to happen. So let me give you an example. This was my
Yeah.
very first client ever,
Okay.
and she called me and she said nothing happened. Now I am so used to hearing nothing happen now. I usually know that big changes happened if somebody says that at the beginning. She says nothing happened. I'm kind of stalling for time. I'm like, well, tell me about your last couple weeks. And she said, well, so what she was working on, she was dyslexic. She never made it to work on time, and she had what she described as an extreme amount of clutter. And so she was working in this daytime work to tell her brain, what I want is to feel that my life is in order. That was her daytime work. That's how I want to feel my life's in order. So
Mhm.
she comes back, says nothing happened. And I said, okay, what happened these last couple of weeks? Just tell me about your life. And she said, well, I only got one part of my house cleaned out. And I said, wait a second. How many years has it been since you cleaned out a part of your house like that? And she said, oh, I don't I don't remember. I can't remember. A
Yeah.
long time, many years. I said,
Wow.
okay. What else happened these last couple of weeks? She said, well, it is weird. I did make it to work on time every day this week. And I said, really? You did? And she said, oh, wait, except for the day I got there an hour early and reorganized the office before everyone else came in.
What?
Right, exactly.
Wow.
And she was laughing with me. By this point, we're
Yeah.
laughing because these were monumental things. She said if we had put these things on a list, she could never have done them because she had been putting these things on a list for years.
Yeah.
And so,
Mm.
what happens with this process is that when well being is in the driver's seat, it brings about the good feelings and the good things we've wanted to happen without all that work.
Oh my gosh.
So that's an example.
Wow. Okay. I want to sit with that example for a moment because that's significant. And it's, I feel like this is a theme in my own therapy. Like, I show up, and I mean, I've been doing therapy for many years, but I am, the past year and some change has been the newest therapist that I have. And I have such a bias towards focusing on the things that I haven't accomplished yet and the things that I would like to do that are not getting done. And I completely like gloss over the progress that I've made. And I feel like the more I do this work, the more I realize that it really is in the quiet moments where we can notice, or when the progress just shows up and is not going to be this grandiose like prince with a horse, riding on a unicorn with a rainbow in the background. Like, I feel like Disney did not do us any favors with that. But like for us, like that grandiosity of progress is what we're looking for, and it's in the little things. And I love that in your work you're able to be that voice that's pointing out with curiosity and with just mirroring back, like, oh, you got to work an hour early and you were able to clean this part of your house that you haven't in years, or however long it's been. That's that's incredible. That's really significant in terms of the time frame. So you learn distress before meeting Mimi Herman, and then you got to work with her for, was it a few years before her passing?
Correct. It was about 5 years, and I learned about it
5 years.
from her. So
Okay.
a friend I'd met said, "Hey, there's this work. You sleep with this recording, and your life changes." And I said, "Yeah, right, whatever." And he kept kind of badgering me, and I said, "Fine, I'll call her." And when I called her, I thought, "Oh my gosh, she might have the way through this wall that I feel like I've been hitting." For me,
Mm-hmm.
I was doing some meditation work, and it was just, I was hitting a wall, and I thought she might have the way through this wall, so I'm going to give this a try. And then
Mm-hmm.
it was about 5 years that I both worked with her on my own process and then also collaborated with her around refining it.
Wow. I'm so glad you found her before,
Me too.
because I feel like those like there's so many like doing this work, I am constantly learning about new things that are out there that I had no idea were available. And one thing that surprises me every time is like there are these frameworks that maybe they're not the popular choice, or the one that's like completely evidence based, or the one that's not like with the 1500 books out there. But I feel like with complex trauma, those newer approaches that are more tailored to every experience, I feel like those are the ones that are getting the results at the end of the day, as opposed to forcing someone to fit into this neat box of it just needs to be this one way.
Yeah.
So when you're doing this work with clients, have you found in your experience some resistance, like someone, not necessarily that they're not seeing the progress, but that like there's some parts of their life that might be getting in the way of letting this work really get integrated?
That is such a great question. So, um, people's brains have to be ready for this work in a certain way, and that criteria is that they are in enough pain, unfortunately. So when I have a little conversation with folks, they fill out this test on my website, and I have a little short conversation. And what I'm looking for in that conversation is, are you in enough pain? Because I have seen people who come to this and think, oh, this is just the next thing that I'm going to do to make my life better, right?
Mhm.
And but my life's pretty together and everything's working, which is great. If there's somebody out there and your life is working great and it's together, and maybe there's just this one little thing here and there, this is probably not the work for you.
Mhm.
If you are in pain, if you are struggling, that is the reason that's the criteria, is because our brain is naturally resistant to change. There is a wall of protection around that sense of self feeling storage bank, because it's protecting our survival mechanism that was
Mhm.
developed very early in life, before we had a choice, before it was a conscious decision. And that survival mechanism got us through childhood. As bad as it might have been, it was for me. I know it was for you and lots of people. It got us through. And so the brain says, you're not touching this, because
Mm-hmm.
this is how I've survived, and don't you dare think you are going to mess with this. So the brain is naturally resistant to change. And this was part of the reason that this process was developed, because the researchers in this 20 years of research behind this work, Mimi and her team saw that wall of resistance to change, that protection around the sense of self. And
Mm-hmm.
they recognized that it is the rational, when the rational brain is operating, which
Mm-hmm.
is the whole time we're awake, when the rational brain is operating, that wall of resistance to change is up. And it's saying, you're not changing this. So they knew they needed to break through that wall of resistance. And that's why the process works with the brain during sleep, because the rational brain shut down. That's when the sense of self is getting recharged and renewed. And so that is why this process can break through that resistance. Now, having said that, the brain will let you it will let you work on what it will let you work on. And so what I'm doing with clients is following. What's the next thing? What's most intense? What's really up for you? Generally, that's what the brain will let us work on. We
Mm-hmm.
might have an idea. So, say for instance, I'm single right now, and I'm not in a relationship, and I'm not dating or anything. And so I could say, well, I really want to work on that learn to stress that's around intimate relationships. The brain
Mm-hmm.
is like, no, it's not triggered right now. There's no way to work on that. It has to be triggered in order
Okay.
to get work done. And that's when the brain generally will let you start removing layers of learned distress, because the brain finally says, oh, yeah, you're right. This is really painful. Fine. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you take some more layers off.
Mm.
Does that
I
answer your question about resistance?
It does, and something that you also added that I want to talk a little bit more about is how in this work, like it's not a one size fits for all. Every client's gonna look different because they're learning the stress. It's the triggers coming up are gonna be different at different times. Something that I like about this is hearing you say that you're working with what the brain is allowing at a certain time, and it's interesting how like even you could have said that whole thing about being single, not dating. That's totally me right now. That's where I am in my process, and it's funny because I do all this work, and I know from having done this work already and dated even briefly as I have in the past few years, it's a whole different monster when the new triggers start coming in. And I wanted to go back to where this gets created. So my understanding, and please correct me if I am wrong, is learning this stress really gets hot wired during childhood with the developmental experiences that we're having. So I'm thinking here, someone with complex trauma who's developing it over the years of experiences that are pretty much consistent in terms of the toxic shame, feeling bad for your feelings, not having the support, being neglected, abused. And then it's something that, again, with learn distress that I find interesting is how you talk about this core well being that's there from the get go. So I'm gonna frame it and correct me if I'm wrong. So you start with your core well being. That's part of who we are from the moment we're born. It gets completely corrupted if the right people are not in your life and the circumstances just set you up for failure, basically. And learn distress comes in. I'm seeing learn distress as the trauma responses. Is that an accurate?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. That is correct. So here's what I would say.
Yeah.
I would say that your core well-being is this kernel of life that you begin with, and you start absorbing learned distress even while you're in the womb.
Wow.
And then through the first 2.5 years, what your brain's job during that time is to put into place a learned sense of self that allows you to fit well with your family and survive in the world. And so you've got your core well-being. What was supposed to happen during that time, you were supposed to be absorbing how great everyone around you felt about being themselves, being human, and that was supposed to make your core well-being grow, and you fit really well in your uniqueness with their good feeling
Mm,
uniqueness. It's not how it happened, right? It's really not how it happens for anyone on the planet. Everyone has learned to stress. And so
mm,
what happens is people have bad days, people have bad weeks, bad months, bad years, right? And so with the baby, the brain then is like a sponge. It's really absorbing feeling and how it feels to be human, and it's absorbing all of that bad feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly acknowledging people who are much less than like a little dysfunctional, like
Mm-hmm.
really toxic abuse, all of that stuff. I experienced that. Lots of us did. So
Mm-hmm.
all of that is getting absorbed as this feeling that there's something wrong with me being myself.
Mm.
That's learn to stress. And so all
Okay.
of that, your core well-being is growing during that time. But the learn to stress, like you said, I love your word corrupting. That's exactly it. Learn to
Yeah.
stress corrupts well-being.
Yeah.
And so you have this learned sense of self by the age of 2.5 that's really structured, and or structured is not the right word, but it also contains this survival mechanism. Your brain that during that time is developing this mechanism to fit well, sort of like a puzzle piece
Mm-hmm.
with your parents and other early caregivers, older siblings. And so that contains your trauma responses for sure. That sets up, are you tending to be fight, flight, freeze, or fawn?
Mm-hmm.
It also contains things like mom's calmer when I'm quiet. So I always have to be quiet all the time. I better not express myself out loud. That doesn't help me out here. Or I always have to be more perfect all the time. If I'm perfect, they seem calmer. They're good. In the worst case, or really intense case, the only way I can stay safe with these people is to fight back. And so that's where you get people with fight responses, they're primary. And
Mm-hmm.
so you have all of these things, people pleaser stuff, perfectionism, keeping everything under control, following everybody's rules, all of that stuff, rebelling against the rules.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things can be parts of people's survival mechanisms that all got put into place before the age of 2.5, before you had any choice in the matter, because your rational brain starts to develop at the age of 2.5. So before age 2.5, you are a feeling being. You feel good, you feel bad, you hopefully express it. That's it. And
Oh.
so that learned sense of self is not rational. It is not about your thoughts. It is about how you feel about being yourself. And it's
Mm.
put in a place, it's stored in the limbic brain, the part that deals with feelings, not in our rational thinking brain, our prefrontal cortex, which is why you can't think your way out of learn to stress.
Mm.
Right? You can say, I know I shouldn't have to be perfect, but
Right.
you wake up the next day and you're like, okay, I've got all these practices around it, but I still feel like I need to be perfect.
Oh,
That
you
feeling stays.
wow. Okay. You're nailing it, and it's a little heartbreaking to hear like how it gets created. I know. I'm feeling for you. That's the thing about I feel like I'm yet to meet someone who's in this field who hasn't experienced some of this in some way. And 2.5 is so young. I feel like this is before I even started. I mean, I was babbling by then, but I don't remember 2.5. Like it's it's eye-opening to be aware of how much impact happens that young. And then something that I also wanted to make sure I asked you was because I know I learned the stress, there's different types. And I'll spoiler alert, I identified a lot with the perfectionist description in your book, Feel Good Being You. I was wondering for someone who's new to this, who's trying to figure out which one applies to them the most or which types are more resonant. Can you explain the different types of learned distress and how they show up?
Sure, there are 6 learn to stress types. These were identified through the research, through
Hmm.
a scientifically validated personality tool that is something you can go to my website and take the test, and I'll send you a free report. You can find out for free which one you
Mm.
have. So, the important thing to know is that each of these types is a survival mechanism. And the primary goal of that survival mechanism is to keep you safe. But one of the things about safety is that the primary need we have as human beings for safety is to matter or to belong.
Mm.
And you can think about that two ways. If you think about hunter-gatherer tribes, if you think about us in evolution, in a hunter-gatherer tribe, your most pressing need is to matter or to belong within the tribe, because if the tribe throws you out, you are not going to last long, right?
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
same is true of us as children, right? If the
Hmm.
family throws you out, you won't last long. And so that is why I say that safety and mattering and belonging are all the same thing. They're all in the same bucket. Some of these survival mechanisms, and I'm going to describe the six,
Yeah. Take your
some
time.
of them are more focused towards keeping myself safe. More of them feel more focused towards here's how I make myself matter. Okay, so now I'll get to the six. So the first one, idealist pattern. Idealist type is someone who survives by keeping their negative feelings buried and working really, really hard to make some ideal happen. This can be, and it's unique to them, whatever their ideal is. It could be some specific area like family or career, or it could be really across the board. Everything in my life needs to be this certain ideal way or else. So each of these types starts to break down, fall apart as the intensity of learned distress rises. So that happens for all of us. Learned distress is always rising in intensity over time until we start to remove it. And so as the intensity rises for idealist pattern people, they start to feel like it takes more and more work to make good things happen. They've always gotten to everything to work for them, and it's just taking more and more and more work. It's getting harder and harder to the point where sometimes things stop working. Things really feel like they blow up on them.
Mm.
And so for people with idealist type, what their core well-being looks like is things get easier. Number one, easier even than they were like way back. I have clients who are in their 60s who say, things were never easy in my 20s like this. This is
Mm.
amazing.
Yeah.
Another thing is that they get more comfort with all of their feelings. They don't have to keep everything so buried and tightly contained. So
Hmm.
they get more comfort. It's like okay to feel everything. They get more flexibility with life, where things don't all have to be this same certain way, this particular way. Life can unfold and be a little messy, and they don't feel like they're going to die when life is a little messy. So that's
Hmm.
what change can look like for idealist type people. The
Wow.
next one is the one you identified with, perfectionist.
Yep.
Some similarities with idealist type, which is needing to keep all of my negative feelings under control,
Mm.
keep them buried. But on top of that, perfectionist type is about keeping everything under control, myself under control, everything in my life under control. Perfectionists tend to set really strong limits in order to do this, limits or boundaries. Especially around time, around people and interactions, and sometimes around food also. I've seen with perfectionist types, it feels like everything really has to be tightly controlled this certain way, or,
Yeah.
I'm just under threat, right? It just really triggers that feeling of threat. So you can imagine for perfectionist folks, the breakdown tends to be that as the learned distress rises in intensity, things start to feel more and more out of control.
Mm. Hmm.
More and more work to get things under control, and it doesn't even feel possible anymore. And that feels really threatening and really scary. Another thing for perfectionist folks is that, those limits or those boundaries around control tend to put you living, like, I think of this like living inside a fortress where you're safe, you're in these big walls, but
Hmm.
all of a sudden you're feeling invisible, you're feeling lonely, you're feeling like no one sees you or hears you. And so
Mm.
that tends to be part of the breakdown with perfectionist pattern. I don't know if that resonates at all, or if I'm
It does. It does resonate quite a
so
bit.
sorry. I know really how incredibly hard that is
Yeah.
and how scary it is,
It
really.
is. Yeah.
So change for people with perfectionist type. Um, Sort of like idealist type, things loosen up. They start to feel more comfort with all of their feelings. It just feels okay to feel everything. Instead of feeling like, if I feel this, I'm going to die. It
Mm.
feels like, okay, this doesn't feel good. Nobody loves feeling super sad or overwhelmed or angry or anything. These are not pleasant feelings, but it doesn't feel like on top of the unpleasantness that it feels like a threat anymore.
Yeah.
Another thing with
Wow.
perfectionist folks is that they have more flexibility in life, that things can unfold. And another big thing for perfectionists is they start to be seen in a way that feels comfortable and good. And really, they're able to connect more with people because they feel safe being themselves out in the world instead of having to lock themselves down in the fortress.
Wow. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's a really great transition. So,
Yeah.
the next pattern is called Optimist pattern. This one is all crisis all the time. People with Optimist type, the reason she named it Optimist was that they had a crisis today to prove that tomorrow will be better. The problem is that the what stores that pattern, that type, is our 2-year-old brain that only lives in the present moment. So it only is in the present crisis. It never hits that good tomorrow where it's resolved. And so optimist folks tend to be in a constant cycle of crisis. They tend to overcome their crises pretty well, but then they're thrown immediately into the next crisis. So if you have a friend who you say, wow, there's just so much drama, that's optimist type. That's someone who survived by having constant crisis in childhood. That was safety for them, constant crisis.
Hmm.
So as you can imagine, as the rising intensity happens, their crises keep getting better, bigger, not better, bigger, and
Yeah.
at some point too big to overcome.
Mm.
Well-being for these folks is the crises get lower and lower in intensity, they get smaller, they start to become comfortable with peace and calm. That was never safe for them growing up, but
Hmm.
now it's safe to have peace and calm and have things just work out and keep working out well. And I should say with all of these types, one of the thing that happens is that you uncover your core uniqueness. That's your well-being. None of these types is who you are. This is just a box your negative stuff fits into.
Hmm.
So what you're uncovering with each of these is your uniqueness, who you really are, and you get to start to express that in the world and know who you are. So that's optimist type. The next one is caregiver. This one's my type. Hi, my name is Sarah, caregiver. So caregiver type, we feel at the core like we just don't have it within ourselves to accomplish anything on our own, to do anything, to be on our own. So caregivers are constantly feeling like I need somebody else to validate me, to help me, to support me, to everything. And so we tend to be hangers on. We are fawners. We're people pleasers. The way that we try and get what we need from other people is either to fit in with them and get their approval and get them to like us, or to have something really wrong, very often physical illness, which was me also, right? And so if I have something really wrong, they'll come take care of me, right? So that's caregiver type. Starts to break down by um, finding out that doesn't work. Finding out that people pleasing will never get you support from other people. If anything, it makes you more invisible with them. And then a lot of people will walk away from you because you're so needy. They're like, get off me. I don't
Oh.
want this anymore. If
Mm.
caregivers are out there, I hear you, I feel you. It really sucks, but this is survival. And so, people walk away and nothing's working and I'm not getting my needs met. Uh-oh, maybe I'm going to have to meet my own needs. Uh-oh, I can't do that. So that's the breaking point. And so for caregivers, we start to feel that inner foundation, like I was talking about early for me myself, that sense of capacity within ourselves. I can do this on my own. I can think for myself. I know what I think. I want to share who I am in the world.
Mm.
I can push back on other people. I don't always have to get everybody's approval. I don't have to care what they think of me. I can just be myself in the world. Greater capacity. And the cool thing is that, because what I was describing, that hanging on thing, is not interdependence. That is codependence in the classical sense of it, right? And so what starts to happen with caregivers and relationships is that They can be themselves, share themselves. They can enjoy who the other person is. And then, if there's help needed on either side, they can help each other from an equal place instead
Mhm.
of this very hierarchical place where the caregiver places themselves down here and
Mhm.
everybody else is up there, like, oh, you can help me. Oh my gosh. And so, this equality of being comes about, and this stronger inner sense of being comes about for caregivers. And that really is possible, fellow caregivers out there, I promise you.
Mm.
So
Yes.
two more. To defeatist type is the next one.
Okay.
Defeatist type. Um, this really is, I'll remind everyone, none of this was a choice. None of this is a conscious strategy. Defeatists survive by proving nothing ever works for them and always having something going wrong, always having something fail. That's how they survived in childhood. What I've most often seen, I have a piece of defeatist type in my own SQ. And what I think that comes from is that they had a super toxic, super overbearing, super difficult parent or parents. And the only way to get those parents to let up on them, the only way to get anything close to love was to get maybe some sympathy. And the way they got sympathy was to have something going wrong.
Hmm.
I think that's generally where defeatist type comes from. These folks, everyone I've ever met and worked with is brilliant. Defeatists invariably do things with more intention and more meticulousness than anybody else on the planet does them. They work harder at everything and they get half the results, if that. And that is not, they get like accused of self-sabotage or being in victim mentality or whatever. So if there's someone who's resonating with this, I just want you to know out there that I see you, I hear you, and I believe you. I know that you have not been making this happen. I know that you've been working so hard to change this, and this is what defeatist pattern does to people.
Mm.
So the breakdown here is obvious. It keeps getting more intense. The problems get too big. Something needs to change. And then for well-being for defeatists is things start to work. Things actually work. They actually get the right result for the work they're putting in instead of putting the right work in and getting no results. They start to feel comfortable with sharing that good things are happening. That's never been safe. So when someone with defeatist type comes in and says, "Hey Sarah, this good part of the change cycle happened. Oh my gosh, it's so great." I'm like, "Whoa, okay, big change for defeatist type because that's never been safe to do." So that is just so super exciting. I'll never forget a defeatist who said to me, "I've awakened every single morning with this critical voice in my head telling me that I'm going to have to do things more perfectly today, more perfectly, and it's going to fail anyway, but I got to do it anyway." And that's the voice I have started every day with. And he said, "Sarah, I'm waking up happy, and it's very weird, but I'm happy when I wake up." So that really is possible. And that was somebody who was in his 70s already who said that. And learn to stress just keeps getting more entrenched over time. So when someone's older and they have that big a change, it really is possible. So that's the hope for all the defeatists out there.
Mm.
Very last type is called dictator. Sometimes I call this benevolent dictator, to recognize that even if you have dictator type, that does not mean that you are an asshole. I mean, some of them are, but not every person with dictator type is a total asshole. And so, dictator type, the way they stayed safe, the way they kept themselves safe in childhood, was to know everything, to always know the best way to do things, was to win at everything, was to do like execute tasks really well, really perfectly, was to always have the power in the situation. That's where the fight response comes up.
Mhm.
And to always just oppose everything. They are knee jerk oppositional. You tell me that the sky is up, they're like, clearly the sky is down. So that's dictator type. They are rebellers against rules, against laws, against everything.
Mhm.
In context. Again, there are dictators who are not criminals. You know, they're working within society, but they feel that strong sense of the way I keep myself safe is to have the power, rebel, know everything.
Hmm.
So the breakdown here usually comes when they hit a wall with some kind of authority figure or structure that stands in the way of something they really desperately want. So, for an example, I'm thinking of a dictator who really wanted this career path. And the only way for this career path was to go through years and years and years of school and follow a lot of rules that he did not agree with.
Mm,
And so that was the breaking point for him where he couldn't stay in that, like, I know everything, screw all your rules.
yeah.
He had to actually find a way that he could work together. So as he took off Learn to Stress, it allowed him to go through this degree program and actually get through it and become the professional that he is.
Wow.
And so what happens for dictators when they remove Learn to Stress is that that knee jerk reaction thing calms down. They start to be able to evaluate, wait, is this rule or what this authority is saying, is this something that actually is good for me, actually would help me? Oh, maybe it is. They That knee jerk reaction calms down. They actually are able to take in input from other people. Other
Hmm.
people's opinions actually exist, and they can take them in and they can work together with people and become more, excuse me, collaborative. Their relationships get better. They can have relationships more on an equal footing than they have in the past. So that's kind of what it can look like for people with dictator pattern.
Okay, Sarah, you've given us so much to think about. I don't know if anyone else is having this experience right now, but as I hear you talk, and that was one of my questions, that I'm glad you kind of tackled it. Like, you can have elements of different types. Is that, yeah, okay? Because
Yeah.
I totally felt like some of the caregiver also can apply to me. And I could also hear as you were talking, oh, this so and so, I would definitely think that this is the type that applies to them. So like I'm hearing all the things kind of like come together. And something that I love about how you present this information, and you do it in your content, and you've done it so far with my conversation here today, is you're very good at explaining it. So thank you for that, for being so clear. And I like that you present it in terms of, here is the learn the stress, and here is what it looks like to get to the core well-being. So I feel like a lot of the content out there, sometimes the emphasis is on all these things are wrong and all these things are breaking down and it feels painful and we're kind of screwed. And the truth is, we're actually not screwed completely. Like, there are things that we can do, and there's evidence that can come into our lives that can show us that we are getting better. And it's not going to be like a snap of fingers, but it is possible. So I feel like that's your slogan, like, it is possible. And I love hearing that, because we need more of that hope. I feel like with this work, especially the longer that you've been in this state of learn the stress, the harder it can be. It just gets worse and worse. And I love that you give that glimpse of hope in terms of even someone in their 70s. It like doesn't matter how old you are, you can still turn the ship around. um Thinking about all the information you've thrown at us, I am thinking here about, in terms of this process, I imagine that being in relationship with other people is going to complicate things in terms of recovery. I feel like none of us can recover on a vacuum on our own. Like, we have to interact with people, and it's just going to come out that way. When someone is doing this type of work, in terms of like the relationships they have with other people, how are you seeing those relationships being impacted in your clients?
This is one of my very favorite things about
Okay.
this work. And this is one of the things that can sound a little weird. So I'm going to acknowledge that right up front. So I will say the theoretical part of it first, and then I'll give you some examples. When how we feel changes, when we feel more and more of our well-being,
Hmm.
what's really going on with other people in relationships is that other people are responding to us automatically on the basis of how we feel, and they're coming either from their learned distress or from their well-being. And we know people on both sides of the thing, right? We can think of
Hmm.
both kinds of people. And so, what happens when we come more and more from our well being is it makes it more likely that people are going to respond to us based on their well being instead of their learned distress. So, let me give you a favorite example of this. I had a client who was working on this very core relationship piece of learned distress. I don't matter. And she said, well, I've done enough of this. I know that I'm going to feel more like I matter, Sarah. Okay, I get it. But, like my ex husband and his new wife, I mean, they're never going to treat me differently. And I said, okay, we'll see. And 2 weeks later, she says, I don't know what happened, but my ex husband was never really this good to me, even when we were married. And his new wife just sent me the most beautiful email gushing about how I am with our special needs son and how she wants tips from me about how she can be better with our son that we share the custody of. And
Wow.
she said, Sarah, these are miracles. And I didn't do anything different. I didn't say anything differently. I didn't set boundaries. I didn't do anything. And they are treating me completely differently. And what happened? And I have seen this in my own life. I saw this happen with my mother to some degree, not a huge degree, but so it's not going to be like across the board, every single person changes radically toward
Mm-hmm.
you. But you can, so let me say it this way. If people are treating you badly, that is 100% their responsibility, and they are fully accountable for that bad behavior. It's coming from their learned distress in some way, but they are fully responsible for that behavior, full stop.
Mm-hmm.
And if you see a pattern of people treating you a certain way, ignoring you, treating you like you don't matter, abusing you, whatever it is, demanding more and more and more from you when you've given all you can, whatever
Mm-hmm.
it is, if you see that pattern of behavior, that points to your learned distress being a factor there. And that's what, excuse me, that's what you have power to remove and change. And that's when we see relationships start to change is when we feel different.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanna add to this full stop because I something that I did think about earlier when I was hearing you describe the learned distress, and I started even thinking about, oh, so and so has this, and then I would hear you talk about how it can get better, and like that part of me that's still there is like, oh man, like if I can send them this, maybe they'll get better. And I feel like for every time a survivor out there who's had people in their lives who are struggling, like that's the knee jerk reaction. Like how do we get this information to them? And I want to take a moment to acknowledge that like not only it is their responsibility to like take accountability for their behavior, but also take responsibility for their own recovery and their own healing journey. So as tempted as some of you are like me to to start sending them a copy of the book and the link, do remember that like it's I think it's important, and it sounds very cliche, but it's just true. You kind of have to put your own oxygen mask first before you start going around the plane to put other people's oxygen masks on them. And they have to be willing to get that oxygen mask on and keep it on. You can put it on and then they just like whack it the moment you walk away. So like it's yeah, I'm wondering how that's landing for you, Sarah, hearing you that.
Oh, 100% true. I mean, caregiver pattern people are the worst at like saying, oh, this will help you and you and you and you and
Yep.
everybody around you can feel better. And then you'll be able to do more stuff for me. I cringe when I say that, and yet it's true.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's absolutely true. They're just everyone hits that point where they're ready for change themselves. And when we sometimes see people really struggling, really in a lot of pain, and we think that must be enough pain for them to really be ready for this kind of change. And sometimes it's not. People can be in an incredible amount of pain, and it's still not enough for their survival mechanism to say, all right, you can take some off. So we really do have to start with ourselves and focus back in on ourselves. But
Mhm.
when we do, our lives can feel so much better. And sometimes the people around us shift towards us. And sometimes we have new people come into our lives who are wonderful in a way that we haven't experienced before. And so, really, it all comes back to staying focused on our own process, our own healing, and our own change.
Mm. You can definitely say that again. And I'll admit here, and I feel like I've been meaning to say this on the podcast, but I haven't yet. But I'll say it now. I feel like this podcast, part of it is that part of me that is like, okay, like I don't want to be that person sending the links. So I'm just gonna put everything that I'm learning on this podcast and make it available so anyone who wants to find it can. But this is like my way of like getting around that. I don't I don't want to keep this to myself. I want to put it out
Well, that is a wonderful thing, though. I mean, you're really that's a
there.
way that you're not going to individual people and saying, "Hey, you should really do this thing."
Mhm.
You're saying, "Hey, whoever's here, who's ever ready to listen about healing complex trauma, come listen to this. And if you're ready for this, you can do it." So I think that that is a really wonderful way. And I don't think that's really, if you have caregiver type, I don't think that's a caregiver thing. I think it's just a big gift to the world.
Oh, thank you for saying that, Sarah. That really means a lot. I am so glad that we've been able to have this conversation because I I'll just say like my experience like interacting with you so far and hearing your content and how you show up, it's very apparent the work that you've done and the growth that you've done. And as a fellow musician and singer, like a part of me, when you share your career as a violinist, like for how many years did you do that for?
Well, so I did play and gig. I did gig and teach some after I started this work, but full-time violinist up until I was 30. So, you start playing professionally by the age of 16 or 17, and then I went through school and got 2 degrees in violin performance and was playing professionally that whole time. So, the better part of 15 years full-time, and then since then here and there.
Wow, that's incredible. That's a long time. That's a full career that you lived. Yeah. I am yeah, I'm starting to like, and we've talked a little bit about this like on off this conversation about like how I still don't I feel like I've tried to get away from singing and it just always comes back to me. So I feel like something is there to still work with, and I need to find a way where it's aligned with the new values without reverting back to the old trauma patterns of people pleasing and making myself into a chameleon. And what do you need me to sing? What would you like me to do today? How should I, what's the dress code and what songs and how do you want this thing? And like what key is best for you instead of what key is best for me? I know. A lot of recovery.
Oh my gosh.
Uh, and so I could talk to for talk to you for a long time, but I want to be mindful of our time. And I wanted to check in with you. Is there anything that I haven't asked you so far that you wish I would have?
No, thank you for the great questions. It's just been such a fun and meaningful conversation. So thank you.
Absolutely. I agree. I can't wait to hear this back and work on this episode. I also want to ask you something that I asked for all of our guests here at Hello to My Brain, and that is if you could go back in time and the time machine takes you to a difficult time, what would you tell younger Sarah?
Mm. Well, I would say to her what I say to everyone. And this is that you are just great, just being your whole, real, unique self. You matter just for being yourself. You do have everything you need within you to have the good life that you want. And it really is possible to feel good being yourself.
Mm. Take a moment to take that in, everyone. That's beautiful, beautiful, Sarah. And I want to, before I wrap up, I want to, anyone who's curious about learning about learn distressed or working with you or being part of your community, how can people reach out?
Absolutely. So, my website for sure, you can do a lot of learning on my website about this work. All my socials, I post every day on my socials. So I'm on all the big ones. And then the very best way, actually, I think, to learn about this work is to go to my website and take the free, in depth, scientifically validated personality test that was part of the research that's part of my work now that identifies those 6 types. And I'm going to send you this free report with your type or types of learn to stress, the kinds of changes you might expect to see from this process, and a way that you can connect with me if you have any questions about that.
That's wonderful. And everyone, I will link everything to the show notes. So you'll be able to reach out to Sarah and support her work. Sarah, I just want to say it's been such a delight. being with you here today and to get to connect with you. I feel like it's been just wonderful to have this conversation with you and to see the growth that you've done, like even in the way that you carry yourself. It's just very clear that you worked very hard to get here. And thank you for dedicating yourself to helping other people like us reach that point of core well-being, because I feel like it's so important. And I just want to recognize for your work and say that you and your little kiddo, so glad to have you here today.
Well, we're glad to be here, and I just am so appreciative that you've had me here to talk about my work, my favorite thing in the world to do. So, thank you so much, Raisa, and again, thank you for what you're doing. This is a total gift to everyone who's struggling with complex trauma or doesn't even realize they have complex trauma, but is just starting to explore. So, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that, Sarah. It really means a lot. And thank you for joining us here for Hello Trauma Brain. All right, Trauma Brains, checking in. How are you feeling after my conversation with Sarah? I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. In this episode's healing invitation, I want to offer you a few things to reflect about. Is there anything from the patterns that Sarah was talking about that resonated with you? I invite you to notice this week what things come up for you as you reflect on our conversation. If a particular pattern resonated with you, perhaps you start noticing that some of the behaviors you have language now. If you are curious to learn more about Sarah's approach, you can check out her website and take her free questionnaire. I do want to remind you that complex PTSD is complex, and I'm always going to encourage you to seek help from a professional. I actually took it myself, and the SQ that I got basically shows that I am pretty high on the caregiver and idealist pattern. I have to say, I'm finding the results very interesting because when I was preparing for my conversation with Sarah, I remember resonating with the perfectionist pattern, which is what I mentioned during our conversation. But yeah, I'm going to have to re listen to this episode myself and also dive in a little bit more to learn something new about myself, or maybe something that was just completely on my blind spot. Please let me know how this episode's healing invitation goes if you choose to accept it. Before we wrap up this episode, all music and production is courtesy of yours truly. And I love to share a few ways you can help support the podcast. You can subscribe and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you're listening. Share this episode with anyone you think might find it helpful. Follow the podcast on Instagram at Hello Trauma Brain. Subscribe to the Hello Trauma Brain YouTube channel and hit the notification bell to be the first to know when new episodes go live. And if you like, you can also make a donation via PayPal. Thank you in advance for your support. Even a little goes a long way in helping this podcast reach more survivors who could benefit from this content. No worries, links to everything will be in the show notes. It is time for our farewell affirmations. I invite you to repeat after me. I welcome the belief that I am enough. I am lovable. And I deserve to heal. Thank you so much for joining me and Sarah today. We hope you found this episode helpful. I wish you the best as you reconnect with your core well being. If you are watching on YouTube, there will be links on the screen coming shortly that you can use to subscribe and check out more episodes. I wish you a gentle rest of your day, and I will see you next time.